Welcome to the Great Detectives of Old Time Radio. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham. If you have a comment, email it to me, box13@greatdetectives.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Detectives and become one of our friends on Facebook, facebook.com/Radio Detectives. I want to start off by thanking Todd for sending a donation to Adam Graham, P.O. Box 15913, Boise, Idaho 83715. Also, I want to remind you about our other podcast, in particular, The Amazing World of Radio at amazing.greatdetectives.net. You should have had a chance to listen to the first episode in our Kirk Douglas series, which we'll be doing Monday through Thursday this week. And then Friday through Sunday, we're going to bring you a series of Easter programs. So this will be the first week where we've had 7 straight days of podcasts on the Amazing World of Radio. And of course, you can check out all of our past series, including the recently completed Jack Webb series, Great Movies Over Radio, and the Summer of Angela Lansbury over at amazing.greatdetectives.net. And also remember our World War II podcast, thewar.greatdetectives.net, and public domain video theater at videotheater.greatdetectives.net. Well, now it's time for today's episode of It's a Crime, Mr. Collins. The original air date is October the 28th, 1957, and this one is The Red Hot Mama.
It's a crime, Mr. Collins.
It surely is. After all, even though my husband is a famous private detective, I get tired of men throwing bullets at his head and women throwing themselves. Yes, it's Gail Collins here, and I'll be back in just a moment to set the stage for our puzzling crime.
It's a crime, Mr. Collins. I gathered from what you said a moment ago, Gail, your husband's life is a mixture of high-velocity guns and high-velocity women.
Well, it really isn't quite as bad as that, Jack.
Well, in that case, you must have had a particular case in mind, or a particular girl.
Yes, I did. I was thinking of Elaine Cheney. As Greg said, she reminded you of an expensive red high-powered car standing at the curb with its motor idling. We saw her for the first time when we answered a telegram asking us to fly to an island in the Florida Keys. There was no reason, just a request to come. So, because we're in business, we went. When we arrived, we hired a car and drove to the place we'd been told to find, about 3 miles along the coast from the main town. And when we saw it, Greg just had to stop the car there and then.
Say, will you get a look at that pile?
You mean that's where we're going? To that place up there on the cliff, Greg?
Unless there's another castle on this road, honey. And if there is, the locals don't know about it. They directed us here.
Greg, it looks...
Yeah, that's exactly how it looks. Like something out of Wuthering Heights. Now, who'd want to build a joint like that? Except Cecil B. DeMille, I mean. And look how close to the cliff it is. You have to fall 300 feet before you get to your front garden. Oh, well, ours not the reason why. Ours but to make dough.
And live to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's right. Funny how that joint makes you feel that's going to be a battle.
A quarter of an hour later, we drove through the heavy iron gates of the house, along a gravel driveway, and stopped in front of the door of this fantastic, bleak, but somehow magnificent pile of stone someone called home. And as our car stopped, a man walked down the granite steps towards us.
Mr. Collins? Are you Mr. Collins?
If I'm not, my wife's traveling with the wrong man. Yeah, I'm Collins.
I'm glad you're here at last. I can't tell you how glad.
This is Mrs. Collins. Your name is...
Prescott. I sent a telegram asking you to come here. How do you do, Mrs. Collins?
I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Prescott.
She means we came down here more or less in the dark, so we're both anxious to know what the deal is, Prescott.
I haven't time to tell you now. They're all waiting for us in the drawing room.
Well, that's well, but don't you think you should wise us up before we go?
I tell you, there isn't time. We can do all that later. If I don't get in there and talk to them, the roof's going to blow off this place. They've been here locked up together for 3 days, and there's murder in the air. library, just ahead of us.
Prescott, I gather you're pretty worried, but can't you give us a clue why we're here? Who are you? Who owns this place? Who are they, as they say in the Mystery Series?
And what's all this talk about murder, as they say at an inquest?
I am the late Mr. Cheney's attorney. You'll have to forgive me. The strain. You've no idea what it's been like. You're going to meet them now. I ask you to say nothing at all, until I tell them why you're here.
Okay, this is your party.
Thank you. Now we'll go in.
And you think we believed you stayed here because you loved Uncle Janus? You hated him. You stayed because...
Roger, please. That's not necessary.
Why, here's Mr. Prescott. Don't stop him, Mr. Prescott. I find him most charming when he's in this mood. He amuses me.
Sometimes I could kill you for the things you say, Elaine.
If you can stop squabbling for one moment, I have some visitors I want to introduce.
Visitors? How nice.
Who are these people, Prescott?
These are two people who will be present at the reading of your uncle's will, Roger.
What right of
Allow me to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Collins. This is Mrs. Cheney, Mrs. Elaine Cheney. She's the wife of the late Janus Cheney.
Why, Mr. Collins, this is a pleasure. I'm very pleased to meet you.
Hello, Mrs. Cheney. How mutual can a feeling get?
And there she was, the high-powered sports model. When she saw Greg, she revved her motor a little. And Greg, the great dope, sat up and took notice. High stood on one foot to stop him kicking him in the shins. And Prescott went on with his introduction.
This is Mr. Roger Cheney. Mr. Cheney is the late Janus Cheney's nephew.
How do you do, Mr. Cheney?
Let's take the hellos for granted. What are you here for, Collins?
I never take anything for granted, Mr. Cheney. That's the story of how I came to get married.
He is here because I asked him. I wanted him to be present when your uncle's will is read, which will be now.
I'm not sure I like this. I've never heard of this guy before. Did Uncle Janus say anything about him being present?
If anyone has a right to object, I have, Roger, and I don't. You're going to read the will now, Mr. Prescott?
Now, let's sit down quietly. Mr. and Mrs. Collins, if you'll sit on the sofa.
Thanks. I've got a feeling I'm going to enjoy that.
I have the will here in my pocket. I might tell you all that I shall be more than happy to get this duty off my hands.
I think I know how much of a strain it's been, Mr. Prescott. But you must remember it's been a strain for us, too. Ever since you asked Roger and Nancy to come here 3 days ago, it's been obvious we all have something to expect from Janus's will. The only question is, what? It's made us all a little edgy.
Well, here's your answer. The last will and testament of Janus Cheney. I, Janus Cheney, being of sound mind and in possession of my mental faculties, do hereby will and bequeath. Firstly, to Nancy Cheney.
Nancy? What is she going to do with it? Why, she's not even here.
Will anyone tell me who Nancy is?
She's a niece, lives in England. To Nancy Cheney, the sum of $5,000.
$5,000?
I told you he was angry.
Together with my earnest advice to avoid my nephew Roger Cheney like the plague, until she's either spent it or secured it, so he can't get his hands on it.
Dear Uncle Janus.
To my wife Elaine, I bequeath the sum and total of all my worldly goods, other than the bequest previously made to my niece.
What? What did you say?
He said, all my worldly goods, Roger. All left to me.
The sum total of my worldly goods, other than the bequest previously made to my niece, upon the fulfillment of the following conditions.
Conditions?
I thought there'd be a twist somewhere. Uncle Janus was like that.
My wife, Elaine Cheney, will immediately have drawn up by my attorney, Guy Prescott, a will of her own, whereby my nephew, Roger Cheney, will become her sole heir in the event of her death from any cause whatsoever within 6 weeks of my death. If my wife survives this 6 weeks period, however, my nephew is to forfeit forever all claim to any part of my estate.
I don't get this.
Is that all?
Not quite. I further declare that during the 6 week period following my death, both my wife and my nephew must remain in residence in this house.
When that guy makes a will, he doesn't fool around.
6 weeks? We're to be locked up here together for 6 weeks?
That was your husband's will, Elaine.
I've just understood what that will means. The only way I can get my hands on that money, which I need very badly, is for you to die, Elaine. Die within 6 weeks. And that's something you're not likely to do of your own free will. Is it, Elaine?
If ever there was murder in a man's eyes, it was in the eyes of Roger Cheney. But keep your ears pinned, friends. We'll be back in a moment with more of our story. So now we knew why we'd been sent for, to keep Mrs. Cheney alive. And as Greg remarked to Prescott, it seemed a crazy assignment, because if anything suspicious happened to her, there could be only one person responsible, Roger Cheney.
That's your job to worry about things like that, Mr. Collins. All I want you to do is keep Elaine Cheney alive for 6 weeks.
But that will's an open invitation to murder. You don't think Roger would accept it, do you?
Don't ask me anything about the Cheneys. They're all eccentric.
You mean mad?
I know what you're thinking. Would Cheney's will stand up in court? There's always a doubt, of course, but I think it would. I believe he was eccentric, but not mad. Although
what, Mr. Prescott?
in the envelope containing Janus's will, I found 2 envelopes. One was marked to be opened in 6 weeks' time. The other was addressed to me, to be opened now.
So?
His letter to me was just 1 line. Here, take a look at it.
If murder springs like Phoenix from night's black line.
Do you make any sense out of it? I don't.
Seems screwy to me.
I told you Janus was eccentric. But his nephew? I don't know. Maybe he's gone a little further along that road. Make no mistake, Elaine's in danger.
And what did the lady herself have to say about all this? Well, she seemed a little amused when she talked to Greg. Only when she smiled, her eyes stayed cold.
Well, you heard the will, Mr. Collins. In 6 weeks, I could be dead.
You really believe that, Mrs. Cheney?
Roger Cheney is capable of anything. Not only because that's his nature, but because he's hopelessly in debt. He's been counting on something from his uncle's estate, and now...
That's enough. You didn't waste any time poking your nose in, did you, Collins?
I have a perfect right to talk to him. He's here to protect me.
Protect you? Anyone would think I was a slavering beast or something.
No one's put that to me yet, Mr. Cheney, but there is this point. Why don't you leave this place?
Leave? Why should I leave?
Well, Mrs. Cheney here's pretty healthy. I don't think she'll die in 6 weeks.
But she might, Collins. She just might. And if I'm to collect, I have to be here in this house. You made that will in my favor, Elaine?
I had no choice. Mr. Prescott made it out, and I signed it.
Thank you. You're very kind. I suppose that makes your ears twitch, Collins. You see, the scene's all set.
I know. With a hark and a hiss and a rotten laugh.
Exactly. Well, now, everyone's sure I'm going to be a murderer. You're sure, Elaine? And from now until the 6 weeks end, you're going to be afraid. You're going to keep away from me. If ever you find yourself alone with me, your pulse is going to beat a little faster. If something happens to wake you in the night, you're going to lie there in your bed imagining. Yeah, imagining.
You've had your fun, Cheney. Drop it.
And if I wanted to kill Elaine Collins, what could you do to stop me? 6 weeks is a long time. Somewhere in that 6 weeks, a time could come when no one's on guard. You see, it must come.
You wouldn't dare. They'd hang you.
You've already pointed out I'm desperate for money. There's no saying what a desperate man will do.
That was a really lovely house to be in. 1 week followed another, and every day the tension was screwed up a notch. Prescott stayed on, looking like an undertaker waiting for a client. Roger and Elaine were like a couple of hungry big cats waiting for the other to pounce. And in all this, Greg went his own quiet way, doing his job. He kept Mrs. Cheney under his eye all day. We moved our bags into an empty room next to hers, and waited and watched, and watched and waited. Tell me, Greg, do you really believe Roger Cheney's going to try to kill her?
I don't know. I don't like Cheney. It wouldn't surprise me if he was a little mad, but murder, I don't know. Come on, let's go down to dinner. If Roger Cheney's fixing to poison Elaine.
Oh, Elaine.
Well, I was going to say if Roger Cheney fixes to poison Elaine, I'd like to be there.
So we went downstairs to dinner. And she didn't have to be a weather vane to tell which way the wind was blowing. With less than a week left of the 6-week period, the storm was ready to break.
Afraid there's going to be a storm tonight. I'd close my windows tightly if I were you, Collins.
We're getting into the hurricane season, aren't we?
That's right. Anything might happen.
Anything at all. Lightning, wind, thunder, even murder.
Do you have to talk like that? Give it a rest, Roger.
Why shouldn't I say what's in everyone's mind? Murder, murder, murder! That's what you're all thinking.
If someone doesn't stop...
Mrs. Cheney.
I tell you, I can't stand any more of this.
Elaine, you're upsetting yourself for nothing. Roger doesn't mean you any harm.
Leave her alone. Let her sweat out the full 6 weeks.
Can't you stop him, Mr. Prescott?
I can only appeal to him, Elaine.
Appeals will do no good. You see, I like to see Elaine writhe.
That'd be nice in a nightclub, but here it seems sadistic. What have you got against her, Cheney? Just the money?
That's one reason. The other is that she's not a Cheney. Yeah. I think I've had enough of this company. Oh, you're relieved that I'm leaving the table, Elaine?
Yes, I am.
Don't be too happy, my dear. You're not safe yet. You haven't collected my uncle's money yet. And you won't.
Oh, boy, listen to that storm.
What's the matter, Greg? Can't you sleep?
I think this place has finally got me, honey. I'm all wound up like a spring, and don't know what's wrong all of a sudden.
It's the place and these people. I wouldn't use them to scare my children.
It's more than that. Tonight, anyhow. I've got a feeling in my bones, and it's not arthritis. Here, have a cigarette.
Oh, not now. I've cleaned my teeth.
I keep telling myself Roger Cheney'd be crazy to try anything. Then I tell myself he is crazy anyhow.
Oh, Greg!
It's okay, honey. The window's blown open, that's all. Prescott wasn't kidding when he said that. Gail, can you hear? That's Elaine.
Greg, be careful.
That crazy Cheney. He might have known he couldn't get away with this.
Greg, she stopped screaming.
That's great, and well locked in. Mrs. Cheney, the door. Unlock it, will you? The key must be on the other side.
He tried to kill me. He came into my room and tried to smother me.
Gail, come and get her. She's fainting.
Okay, Greg. I got her.
Look after her. I'm going after Cheney. Did you see which way you ran when he left your room, Mrs. Cheney?
You don't have to look for Mr. Cheney. Collins.
Mr. Prescott, he tried to kill me.
He won't try it again, Elaine. He's lying at the bottom of the stairs with a broken neck.
And that's how it was. Roger Cheney had run out of Elaine's room when she screamed, tripped at the top of the long stone staircase, and killed himself. And that seemed like poetic justice. A would-be murderer who killed himself. A couple of hours after the tragedy, we gathered in the library, waiting for the dawn and the police. Outside, the storm still raged. Inside, Elaine did her best to stay hysterical. Mr. Prescott looked like an undertaker who'd found a client. And Greg? It was only then that I realized Greg wasn't around. Mr. Prescott, have you seen my husband anywhere?
I beg your pardon? I'm sorry. I was thinking.
Greg, he's not here. That seems to be a failing of your husband, Mrs. Collins. He wasn't around either when the...
Elaine.
It's okay, Mr. Prescott. She doesn't worry me any.
No need to upset you any more than necessary, my dear.
You seem to be very worried about what Mrs. Collins thinks, Prescott. What about me?
Now, Elaine.
The fact is, you don't like me. Well, I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking anyone to like me now.
Now, Mrs. Cheney?
Yes, now. I'm a rich woman, Mrs. Collins.
I didn't think the young fool would do it.
Greg, where have you been?
Hello, honey. You looking for me?
We all wondered where you'd gone to all of a sudden.
I've been looking around. How do you feel now, Mrs. Cheney?
Oh, fine. I'm used to being almost murdered every night.
That's the funny thing about people. They can get used to almost anything.
Well, I don't care what anyone says. I find it hard to get hold of the fact that Roger Cheney tried to commit such a stupid murder.
That shows how little you know, Mrs. Collins.
You know, I had the same feelings about your nephew. I figured he was sadistic and all that. The way he teased you about how he might murder you, but, I didn't really think he'd try.
You already know what I think about you as a detective, Mr. Collins. Prescott, when Collins' bill comes for protecting me, tear it up. He didn't earn his money.
I shall not be handling your affairs, Elaine. Make your own arrangements.
I see. Very well. Suit yourself.
Oh, Mrs. Cheney, I got a word of advice for you. Don't get rid of a good lawyer like Prescott too fast.
No? Why not?
You're going to need him when you face a rap for murder.
What?
When I... What?
When you face a murder rap, pal. Because when the cops get here, they're going to charge you with the murder of Roger Cheney.
Greg said it just like that, nice and quiet. Elaine had murdered Roger. Well, in a moment we'll bring you the climax of the case. When Greg accused Elaine of murder, he could have dropped an anchor in the room with no effect. Everyone was stunned. And then Elaine began to laugh.
Oh, really, Mr. Collins. You're not a good detective, but you're very original.
Collins, take my advice. Be careful what you say. She's a vicious woman.
Sure she is. She had to be to murder Roger Cheney. But she was cute about it, too.
He tried to kill me. He fell down the staircase when he ran out of my room.
You want to know why he fell? Because of this.
Let me go. You've gone mad.
Collins.
That's okay. I've got what I wanted. It was in the pocket of Elaine's robe.
A piece of rope.
It comes from the Venetian blind in Elaine's room. And it was stretched across the top of those stairs.
What utter nonsense. It came down in my hand when I drew the blind tonight.
Take a look at the end of the rope. It's been cut.
Prescott, stop him. You can't stand there.
I'm not your lawyer anymore, Elaine. You said so yourself.
You tied this rope across the top of that staircase. You arranged to meet Roger in your room tonight.
No.
When he came there, you said something like, wait here while I lock Collins in his room. You did that, and at the same time you rigged up your booby trap.
You can't prove a word of this. Not a word.
Then you went back to Cheney, talked to him for a second, and then started screaming. Cheney thought you were trying to frame him, so he started to run. He ran out of your room, took a swallow dive over that rope. You untied the rope and then unlocked my door.
I knew he wasn't a killer.
Take a look at it, Prescott. If that's not the face of a murderer, I've never seen one. And what about the way Cheney was supposed to try to murder her? With a pillow, smothering her. You ever tried to smother anyone without doping them first?
You'll never prove it. You can't prove it. Roger hated me.
Sure he did. And he wanted your husband's money. But there was an easy way to get it, pal. All he had to do was go to court and prove Janice Cheney was of unsound mind. And that wouldn't be hard. Did he tell you that tonight, Mrs. Cheney? That he'd started proceedings to break the will?
No.
Isn't that how you got him up to your room? To discuss a little deal? Then you screamed and the poor guy ran.
You won't be able to prove a word of this. Not with the lawyers I'll be able to hire. I'm a rich woman. Do you realize that? A rich woman.
Rich? Elaine, if you're banking on money from Janus's estate, forget it. There's no money.
No money? Well, of course there's money. He was rich.
You're an extravagant woman, Elaine. You spent all Janus's money before he died. He even mortgaged this house to give you money. And there's none left.
You're lying. There has to be money.
There's none.
There has to be money. I fought for it. Struggled for it. Roger was going to take it away from me, but I stopped him. There has to be money, I tell you. There has to be.
Once she'd started, and once she realized there really was no money in Janus's bank account, Elaine Cheney kept screaming until she told the whole story. The police didn't need to make out a case. She gave them a confession. She sounded as though she didn't care. So, a week later, Greg and I were flying back to San Francisco. Greg, how did you guess that Roger Cheney had decided to contest the will on the grounds that his uncle was insane when he made it?
Well, I figured it out. With me there, murder was out of the question. If Roger Cheney didn't go to her room to murder her, why did he go?
She must have invited him.
He wouldn't have gone within 10 miles of that dame without a good reason. In my book, there was only one good reason. Janus's will.
Brilliant. Positively brilliant. And, you know, I thought you liked that woman.
Yeah, I got a crazy wife.
Greg.
And but you know something? The man who really solved this case was Janus Cheney.
Huh?
That's true. He knew Elaine pretty well. His eyes were wide open.
How do you mean he solved the case?
He wrote a one-line letter to Prescott, and it said, if murder springs like phoenix from night's black loin.
Go on.
That's all. You see, he knew if anyone died in that house, it would be Roger. That's how well he knew the fair Elaine.
I don't get it.
If murder springs from out of night's black loin, death is alive on the other side of the coin.
Huh?
In other words, not Roger, not the one we all expected to kill, but the one on the other side of the coin. Elaine Cheney. That bit Janus Cheney wrote is from a poem.
And you suspected her simply because you knew the second line.
Well, I knew the second line, but I didn't know what it meant until too late. Until Roger was dead.
Greg, you're wonderful. You even know poetry.
Oh, what's poetry, anyhow?
What's poetry? Why, it's a rhyme, Mr. Collins. Don't go away. In just a moment, we'll be back with you.
Well, folks, Gail and I hope you enjoyed our adventure, The Red Hot Mama. Be sure to visit us next time for another Puzzle in Murder. For where there is crime and romance, there you'll find Mr.
And Mrs. Collins.
Welcome back. Well, I'm recording this program during the whole COVID-19 outbreak, where we're practicing social isolation and social distancing. The wife and the nephew are two people who remind me that there are people who it's worse to be around them than to be alone. I really felt for Greg and Gail because they had to put up with these two for 6 weeks. I mean, goodness, if this were real life, I would have to have them on the suspect list. Because those two, wow, what pieces of work. And at the end of the day, it kind of seems like Greg is not going to be paid for any of this, which makes this even worse. Although I do think the attorney should kind of be responsible for their fee because he knew the estate didn't have any money when he brought Greg on. And so since he knew that, Greg, I think, would have a pretty good case against him. At least it seems to me as a layman. And for that matter, why didn't the lawyer just state at the outset that there was no money in this estate? Because I'm kind of like, this seems a little ethically dubious, because by not telling them about this, he really was setting up a situation where a murder could happen. And I wondered about the will too, just how legal it might be. Because I remember back, I forget whether it was a paralegal course I took or whether it was the business law course I took in high school. But they had this idea of agreements that were against public policy. Like if you hire someone to go out and kill someone else, you can't really sue the hitman if he doesn't follow through, like for breach of contract, because that'd be against public policy. And so would a situation where people were promised money, provided they never got married. And apparently that only applies to contracts, but I'm wondering if there would be any regulation on a will like this that really does set up the possibility of a homicide, or I should say the probability of it with the way this is written, where they're forced to live under the same roof and the nephew has 6 weeks to kill the wife or he can't possibly inherit the estate. So I'll welcome any opinions more informed than mine on that question. We turn now to listener comments and feedback, and we have this from Todd. I'm writing to send a long overdue donation to say thank you for all the hours of enjoyment you provided over the past few years. My favorite will always be Sherlock Holmes, but Richard Diamond and Johnny Dollar were also great entertainment. I enjoy almost all the shows except for the one with Frank Sinatra. I like his singing, but couldn't stand him otherwise. Unlike everyone else, I really enjoy It's a Crime, Mr. Collins. Sometimes the audio quality makes it hard to hear, or on my iPod, but I think the show is vastly entertaining. I don't know if anyone else has mentioned anything about the yours truly Johnny Dollar episode, the Abel Tackett matter. Particularly enjoyed that episode because it was modeled after one of my favorite novels, The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Johnny takes the place of the narrator Marlowe, who tells of his search for the man named Kurtz, who is Abel Tackett in the radio version. It was fun to see how the novel was transformed into a radio drama with the detective angle. I think it turned out pretty well and was happy with the results. The writers were able to utilize some of the key plot points in the novel that made the radio version a recognizable copy. At least that's my opinion. I look forward to all the great radio you work so hard to bring to us. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your note, Todd. It's great to read. I think someone did mention a book. I forget if it was The Heart of Darkness. I did do a check, and there was actually a couple of radio adaptations of it. Including a 1-hour adaptation over the NBC University Theater. And there was also one done for This Is My Best, starring Orson Welles. I'll have to see if there is any potential use for one of those, like in a future Amazing World of Radio series. Again, thank you so much for your letter. I definitely appreciate it, Todd. All right, I also want to go ahead and thank our Patreon supporter of the day. Thank you to Jim. Jim has been one of our Patreon supporters since January 2019, currently supporting us at the Detective Sergeant level of $7.14 or more per month. Thank you so much for your support, Jim. And that will actually do it for today. Join us back here tomorrow for The Man Called X, and we'll be back again next Tuesday with another episode of It's a Crime, Mr. Collins. In the meantime, send your comments to box13@greatdetectives.net. Follow us on Twitter @Radio Detectives and become one of our friends on Facebook, facebook.com/Radio Detectives. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham, signing off.